Hi, my name is David Kelsey. We're today going to be working on some exercises to apply the concepts that we got in Lecture 6 with regard to rhetorical devices. So this is an application of these rhetorical devices. And what we're going to learn here is how to pick these rhetorical devices out. So the first exercise here that we're going to look at, these are just sort of statements and claims, and what we want to do is we want to try to find the rhetorical device in the claim. So the first one, it says there, it could be worse, right? Usually, it's funny, usually when somebody says that, it really can't be much worse, right? Which is interesting. But that's what we call a downplayer, right? Downplaying the significance or whatever it is, you know? There, it could be worse, right? The next one, it says, Smithers might have visited a gentleman's club once or twice, but that hardly could disqualify him from the race, right? And this is an interesting one and a good one to make a kind of simple point, which is that when language looks strange to you, like it doesn't really belong, like it kind of goes ding, 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 you know, this is a bit weird, this phrase being stated here, that's usually rhetorical, right? And if you read this one, gentleman's club clearly kind of sounds like a bit of an odd one here, right? So gentleman's club is a kind of euphemism, right, for like a strip joint or something like that. And, you know, so that would be the rhetorical device here, euphemism. The next example here says, whistleblower, dude's a snitch, right? So a couple of things that are interesting about this one, the word snitch, right, is definitely, you know, that's like a way to put, you know, somebody being tattletale, essentially, right? And so that, you know, I think to me that sounds like a kind of negative way to put that, so that would be a dissamism, right? I think too with this one of the interesting things that strikes me about this one is that usually when you think about profanity, for example, calling someone name like a snitch, any kind of language like that, I think usually it's kind of rhetorical way to put things, you know? Just a kind of thought. The next example, it says, excuse me, dear, I must powder my nose. So powder my nose is a kind of euphemism for going to the bathroom, right? And that's something, I don't think many people say that anymore, but something people used to say, right? Here, the next one says, we have to take poor Fido to the animal shelter, right? So the phrase here, animal shelter, right? That would be a euphemism for the pound, right? Essentially, right? So, so we have a euphemism with that one. The next one, it says, you say you are in love with Oscar, but are you sure he's right for you? Isn't he a little too mature for you? So if you read that one, you know, there's a lot going on with that one, right? Are you sure he's right for you? Then it says, isn't he a little too mature? Mature is kind of a strange one there, right? And it seems like a gentle way of putting that he's a bit too old, right? And so that would be a euphemism, mature, right? Okay, the next rhetorical devices examples here, it says, the next one says, he was at the bar for 2 hours, officer, but I know he had only 4 drinks during that time. This one seems like a case where, you know, essentially you're trying to downplay how many drinks you've had, right? Only 4 drinks. So that would be a downplayer with only. The next one, the key principle is responsible energy exploration. And remember, it's not drilling for oil, it's responsible energy exploration. This is, again, another one where the language just looks a bit weird, right? Responsible energy exploration. And so that would be a kind of euphemism for drilling oil, right? Then the next one, it says, of course, it may be that Aaron Hernandez didn't even commit the assaults he was accused of, right? It may be. So the interesting thing there is that it may be is, again, kind of a way to cast a bit of doubt, right? And it looks to me here, the way I read that is as a kind of Weaseler, right? Like maybe he did, maybe he didn't, right? That's kind of the way it suggests, you know, a way out, right? By plugging that in there. Try the neutron diet for just 4 weeks, and you could lose as many as 20 pounds, right? This is kind of like, I think we saw this one in lecture 6. This is, you know, again, a Weaseler, right? With the could and then I think as many as well, which means essentially that you might not lose any weight, right? The next one, him, oh, that's just my brother. Oh, that's just my brother, right? So usually when you have a claim like that, that's just my brother, right? That's a downplayer, right? No big deal. The next example here we have, Devin is a total jock. Don't go making him your study partner. This seems to portray a stereotype about jocks, right? So I think that would be the one there. The next one says, at least his wife isn't rude. This is kind of an interesting one, but if you think about the context in it, with a claim like this, it would probably be a kind of innuendo, right? The implication is that at least his wife isn't rude because he is, right? The next one, don't you have anything better to wear than that? To me, that reads as, again, a kind of innuendo and really a loaded, a rhetorical question, right? It's kind of like a innuendo in the form of a question. And essentially, the point is to imply that you need to find something else to wear, right? Then you have the claim here, the next one, who do you like better, me or Sydney? And usually when you have that kind of claim, it's also a rhetorical question, right? Of course, the answer would have to be there that you like me better, right? An attorney questioning a witness. So if you're awake when you cross the bridge, just when did you fall asleep at the wheel? And this one, again, is what we would call a loaded or rhetorical question, right? Notice that if this person answers and says when they fell asleep at the wheel, of course, they're admitting that they fell asleep at the wheel, which would be horrific. The next example here, no, I'm sure you'll enjoy playing tennis with Jerome. He gets around pretty well for a guy his age. So to me, this one strikes me as a kind of innuendo. The implication is that Jerome is really pretty old. Okay. Okay, the next example here, has Harry been a faithful husband? Well, he hasn't been through a Donald Trump phase, right? This one is kind of humorous, I think, but again, this seems to me a kind of innuendo, an implication that that he's been unfaithful or something, right? Why is it, do you suppose, that pit bulls are all mean and vicious? Says the next one. Now, of course, this one should strike you immediately as a kind of stereotype about pit bulls or something like that. And also, it seems also to suggest a kind of implication that just in virtue of this question that they are all mean and vicious, which seems to be also kind of like a loaded question as well, And so maybe you have a stereotype and a loaded question going on here. I don't know. Let's see. The next one, I wouldn't worry about the train being late. This is Germany, Again, to me, this strikes me as a stereotype about Germans or something being on time, and then also a kind of innuendo as well, suggesting that. Okay, the next one, why did Obama fail to act swiftly to end the BP oil spill? This one is clearly a kind of loaded question. It's meant to imply that he didn't act swiftly enough, right, in virtue of just asking the question. The next one here, it says, listening to him is like trying to read Playboy magazine with your wife turning the pages, right? A bit humorous, that one is. But that is what we would call a rhetorical analogy, right? A nice, easy way to pick out rhetorical analogies is by use of a term like, right? It says like, right? Listening to him is like trying to read, right? When you have the like, that's the indication that a comparison is being made, right? And, here it's kind of this, obviously this meaning here is to be persuasive with this comparison, so that makes it rhetorical, right? Okay, the next one, it says, yeah, I'm obnoxious, yeah, I cut people off, yeah, I'm rude. You know why? Because you're busy. This is what we would call a kind of a hyperbolic, exaggerated rhetorical explanation, right? So that would be a rhetorical explanation for why this person acts kind of horribly. Liberal soccer moms are precisely as likely to receive anthrax in the mail as to develop a capacity for linear thinking. So I think this one is two things. The first is to poke to poke fun, to ridicule these soccer moms, and then secondly, it's a kind of rhetorical analogy here, a comparison between the linear thinking and the anthrax and the male. Right? A Democrat is a person who takes your money and gives it to lazy people. That seems like kind of a rhetorical way to define what a Democrat is. So that'd be a rhetorical definition. It says here, obviously, next, obviously there's global warming. No responsible climate scientist disputes that. So that one seems, with the word obviously there, like it's suggesting that there's a kind of proof or fact to back this claim up, right? And, so that seems to be like a proof surrogate, right? Proof surrogate. Okay, so the next one, it says medical school, right? You and your fancy 2.9 GPA are going to get into a fine medical school, all right. So here is what we call a ridicule, right? The intent here is to kind of poke fun at their GPA. Right? I'll tell you, there's never been anybody in the entire state of Florida as blitzed as Tom and I were last night. So that would be an example of hyperbole, right? Exaggerating how intoxicated they were. Ratchet and Clank has to be the funniest movie ever made. Go see it. You won't stop laughing ever. So that's, again, a kind of hyperbole. Obviously, that movie is not that funny. If you want to work your way up from being a host to being a server at the Cheesecake Factory, plan on it taking about 1,000 years. So, again, this is a hyperbole. Obviously, it doesn't take 1,000 years. There's probably a type of ridicule going on about the Cheesecake Factory as well, kind of an implied ridicule, but really it's a hyperbole as well. The next one, it says, I trust you have seen Janet's file and have noticed the university, in quotes, she graduated from. So again, quotations like this, right, are meant to downplay the accomplishment here. So meaning that Janet's university is not really that credible or something, right? Okay, so the next one, it says, we'll have to work harder to get Representative Berger reelected because of his little run-in with the law, right? And the interesting thing about this one is the run-in with the law, right, is essentially another way to put that he got arrested, right? And so that's what we would call a euphemism, right? It's to kind of make the arrest look not as bad or something, right? Make more positive light of the arrest. Clearly, Antonin Scalia is the most corrupt Supreme Court justice in the history of this country. So whenever you see a claim like that in the history of this country, right, that should strike you as a kind of hyperbole, right? There's also the word clearly in there, which strikes me as a kind of proof surrogate, suggesting there's proof there when there isn't. The next one, it says, if Maxi Motors gave you a good price on that car, you can bet there's only one reason they did it. It's a piece of serious junk. Right? I think the word junk there is a kind of dysphemism. I think there's also an innuendo here, an implication that Maxi Motors is kind of like a shady kind of business or something as well. So you might have an innuendo and a dysphemism there. The next one, it says, Obama was reelected, then the stock market went into the tube. I'm just saying. Right? Here, what's going on is you have this kind of implication, this innuendo, this underlying idea that's suggested here that Obama had something to do with that, right? Okay, so then the next one, it says, all I know is that they started reporting small amounts of money missing not too long after she started working in their house. Here again, it seems like a suggestion that this person, she that they're referring to here, is sort of like stealing this money or something. So that would be an innuendo, right? The next one, it says, I might be in favor of national health care if it required all Democrats to get their heads examined. Okay? Here, right, we're kind of like picking on or ridiculing, making fun of Democrats, right? So this is a kind of ridicule. The next example, it says, no, Dr. Jack Kevorkian was instrumental in assisting a number of terminally ill people in committing suicide during the 1990s. Then it says, in quotes, we're opening the door to Pandora's box if we claim that doctors can decide if it's proper for someone to die. we can't have Kevorkians running wild, dealing death to people. Okay, and I think at the very end of that little passage there, that paragraph, it says we can't have Kevorkians running wild, dealing death to people. That strikes me as a kind of hyperbole, right, an exaggeration. So that seems like what's going on there. And the last one we're going to look at for the day, it says, in the 2000 presidential debates, Al Gore consistently referred to his own tax proposal as a tax plan and to George Bush's tax proposal as a tax scheme. Right? You can see pretty clearly that plan has a kind of positive tone to it and scheme a negative tone. So plan would be a kind of euphemism and scheme would be a kind of dysphemism, right? So that seems to be what's going on in that one. So, all right, well, I hope you enjoyed the exercises, and I hope you can start to see these yourself and pick these rhetorical devices out. And we'll see you next time.